I showed up to my husband's lavish company party, only to hear whispers, "There's the frigid wife who can't satisfy him." Then his office mistress sneered, "Security, remove this useless woman." I left silently, canceled all our joint accounts, trips, and sold my $17 million stake in his company. Within minutes, my phone blew up with 56 calls. And he was at my door. The security guard at the entrance smiled and waved me through without checking my invitation. After all, I was Mrs. Robert Sterling, co-owner of the company being celebrated tonight. His respectful nod felt natural, expected even. For 15 years I'd been the woman behind Robert's success, the silent partner who reviewed contracts at midnight and hosted client dinners that sealed million-dollar deals. Tonight was different though. Tonight was supposed to be our moment. The ballroom sparkled with crystal and gold, filled with the city's most influential business leaders. I recognized the mayor chatting with the bank president near the bar, while tech moguls clustered around the hors d'oeuvres table discussing market trends. This wasn't just another corporate gathering. This was Robert's coronation as the newest member of the Billionaires Club. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories of women reclaiming their power. If you believe every woman deserves respect and recognition, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see what happens next. I smoothed my emerald silk dress, the one Robert had chosen for me last week. "Green makes your eyes look mysterious," he'd said, kissing my forehead in that distracted way that had become his signature gesture. At 52, I still turned heads, still maintained the figure that had caught his attention 23 years ago when I was his paralegal and he was a struggling attorney with big dreams. "Margaret, darling." Patricia Hoffman, the governor's wife, air-kissed my cheeks with practiced enthusiasm. "Robert must be over the moon tonight. Such an achievement." "He's worked so hard for this," I replied, scanning the crowd for my husband's familiar frame. "We both have." Patricia's smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage. "Of course, dear. You've always been so supportive." Something in her tone made me pause, but before I could analyze it further, she'd already moved on to greet someone else. I shook off the odd feeling and continued through the crowd, accepting congratulations and making small talk with faces I'd known for years. But as I moved deeper into the party, I began to notice things. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. Meaningful glances exchanged over champagne flutes. Smiles that seemed forced, almost pitying. Near the chocolate fountain, I overheard Janet Morrison from the country club whispering to her husband, "I just feel so sorry for her. Everyone knows except." They noticed me approaching and immediately switched topics to discuss the weather. The knot in my stomach tightened. I finally spotted Robert near the stage, surrounded by his usual entourage of executives and investors. He looked magnificent in his custom-tailored tuxedo, silver hair perfectly styled, commanding the room with the confidence that had first attracted me to him. This was his night, his moment to shine, and I wanted nothing more than to stand beside him and share in his triumph. But as I approached, something strange happened. The circle of men seemed to close ranks, their backs turning slightly toward me as if forming a barrier. Robert continued his animated discussion about overseas expansion, completely unaware of my presence just feet away. "Robert," I said softly, touching his elbow. He turned, and for a split second I saw something flash across his face. Not joy or love or even recognition, but annoyance. Quick as lightning, it was replaced by a polite smile, the kind he reserved for persistent salespeople. "Oh, Margaret. You're here." His tone was flat, dismissive. No kiss, no arm around my waist, no introduction to the foreign investors he'd been courting for months. "Of course I'm here," I laughed, trying to keep things light. "This is our big night, remember?" One of the men cleared his throat uncomfortably and excused himself. Another checked his watch and muttered about finding his wife. Within moments, the circle had dispersed, leaving Robert and me standing alone. "I should get back to networking," Robert said, already scanning the room for his next conversation. "These deals won't close themselves." He walked away without another word, leaving me standing by the stage like a discarded prop. The rejection burned, but worse was the growing realization that people were watching, whispering, judging. That's when I heard it, crystal clear above the ambient noise of the party. "There's the frigid wife who can't satisfy him." The words came from somewhere behind me, spoken just loudly enough to ensure I'd hear. I turned slowly, my face burning with humiliation, but couldn't identify the speaker among the sea of faces. Poor thing, another voice added. She has no idea about Vanessa. Vanessa, Robert's new assistant. The 20-something blonde with the perfect figure and ambitious eyes who joined the company 6 months ago. The one who worked late nights and weekend meetings, who traveled with Robert to client presentations, who always seemed to be whispering something urgent in his ear. My hands began to shake as pieces of a puzzle I'd refused to see started falling into place. The late meetings that ran past midnight. The business trips I was suddenly excluded from. The way Robert's face lit up when his phone buzzed with what he claimed were urgent work messages. "Margaret, sweetie." The voice belonged to Vanessa herself, materializing beside me in a scarlet dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Hello, Vanessa," I managed, my voice barely steady. She leaned in close, her perfume sickeningly sweet. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about tonight. This party is really for business associates and key stakeholders only." "I am a key stakeholder," I replied, finding my voice. "I own 17% of this company." "Had," she corrected with mock sympathy. "Past tense, darling. Robert's been meaning to discuss some recent changes with you." Before I could process her words, 2 security guards appeared at my elbows. The same men who'd smiled and nodded at me countless times before now looked through me as if I were invisible. "Security, remove this useless woman," Vanessa announced, her voice carrying across the nearby conversations. The ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward us, witnessing my public humiliation. I looked desperately toward Robert, but he'd turned his back, engaged in what appeared to be a fascinating discussion about quarterly projections. As the guards gently but firmly escorted me toward the exit, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my future had just shattered like crystal hitting marble. The hotel's revolving door spun behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones. Each step down the marble stairs felt like walking away from a grave, not just my marriage but the version of myself I'd carefully constructed over 2 decades. The valet who'd greeted me with such warmth an hour ago now avoided my eyes completely, suddenly fascinated by his clipboard. My heels clicked against the pavement in a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. The city's nightlife hummed around me, couples laughing as they headed to late dinners, groups of friends celebrating Friday night freedom, but I felt completely detached from their joy. In my clutch, nestled between my lipstick and car keys, sat the small velvet box I'd been saving for tonight. I pulled it out, running my thumb over the soft surface. Inside lay a platinum bracelet engraved with coordinates, the exact location where Robert had proposed 23 years ago on that beach in Malibu. I'd commissioned it 3 months ago, planning to surprise him after his speech tonight. The irony tasted bitter in my mouth. "Excuse me, are you all right?" A young woman in a server's uniform had stepped outside for her smoke break. Her concern seemed genuine, unlike the manufactured sympathy I'd endured inside. "Just getting some air," I managed, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. She nodded and lit her cigarette, but I could feel her watching me. Did I look as broken as I felt? I straightened my shoulders and walked toward the parking garage, each step building something new inside my chest. Not grief but something harder. My Tesla sat exactly where I'd left it, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, I sat in the silence, finally allowing myself to think clearly for the first time in months. The signs had been everywhere. Robert's sudden interest in fitness, trading his reading glasses for contacts, the mysterious charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never been to. The way he'd started showering immediately after coming home from work, washing away evidence I'd been too trusting to recognize. But it wasn't just the affair that stung. It was how completely I'd been erased from the narrative of our success. Every business article called it Sterling Enterprises, crediting Robert as the visionary founder. No mention of the woman who'd mortgaged her inheritance to fund his first office lease. No acknowledgement of the connections I'd provided through my family's legal firm. No recognition of the countless nights I'd spent reviewing contracts while he slept. I opened my phone and scrolled to my contact list. My finger hovered over Robert Home for a moment before moving to David Chin, financial advisor. "Margaret? It's past 10 o'clock. Is everything okay?" David, I need you to execute some transactions first thing Monday morning. Can you access my portfolio remotely? Of course, but what's the urgency? We just reviewed your investments last month. I want to liquidate my stake in Sterling Enterprises. All 17 million worth. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Margaret, that's a massive decision. Maybe we should schedule a meeting next week to discuss. Monday morning, David. I also need you to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards. Everything connected to Robert gets shut down immediately. Are you getting divorced? The question hung in the air. Was I? An hour ago I would have said never. Now the word felt inevitable. Just execute the trades, David. I'll call you tomorrow with more instructions. Next I scrolled to our travel agent. Linda answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Linda, it's Margaret Sterling. I need to cancel our trip to Tuscany next month. Oh no, is everything all right? That's such a special anniversary trip for you and Robert. Anniversary trip. 23 years of marriage, and he'd probably planned to spend it with Vanessa while I stayed home, none the wiser. Change of plans. Cancel everything. The villa, the flights, the restaurant reservations. All of it. Margaret, the cancellation fees will be substantial. Are you sure you don't want to wait until morning to think about this? I'm very sure. Send me the paperwork. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Sterling, this is Jake from Hotel Security. You left your gift box on the front steps. Should I bring it to your car? I looked down at my empty hands. Somewhere between the hotel entrance and my car, I'd dropped Robert's bracelet. The coordinates of our engagement, scattered on concrete like everything else we'd built together. Keep it, I texted back. Or throw it away. I don't care. But I did care. That was the problem. 23 years of caring, of putting his dreams before mine, of being the perfect corporate wife while he built an empire on my sacrifices. The caring had become a trap, and tonight, Vanessa had shown me the key to my own prison. My phone screen lit up with an incoming call. Robert's photo filled the display. A picture I'd taken last Christmas when he was laughing at something our daughter had said. He looked genuinely happy then, before Vanessa, before whatever this had become. I declined the call. Immediately it rang again. Then again. By the fourth call I'd started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage. Let him wonder where I'd gone. Let him explain to Vanessa why his wife had vanished into the night. The drive home took me through the financial district where our story had begun. Robert's first office had been in a building that was now a Starbucks. But I could still remember the excitement in his voice when he'd called to tell me he'd signed the lease. We're going to change everything, Margaret. You and me, we're going to build something incredible. We had built something incredible. But somewhere along the way, we had become he, and I'd allowed it to happen. My phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat, call after call from Robert, interspersed with texts that grew increasingly frantic. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. Panic. Confusion. Demands for explanations. By the time I pulled into our circular driveway, the missed call counter had reached 37. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness of our 4-car garage, surrounded by the luxury his success had bought us. Tomorrow I would start dividing it all up. Tonight, I would sleep in our bed one last time as Mrs. Robert Sterling. The woman who walked into that party had been a fool. The woman sitting in this car was something else entirely. I woke at 5:30 just as I had every morning for the past decade. The empty space beside me in our king-sized bed felt vast, though Robert rarely stirred before 7 anyway. His absence seemed different now, permanent rather than temporary. I made coffee in the silence of our pristine kitchen. The automatic grinders were the only sound breaking the morning's stillness. My home office hadn't changed since yesterday, but everything felt different as I settled behind the mahogany desk Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. The filing cabinets lined against the wall contained 23 years of meticulous record-keeping. Every receipt, every contract, every bank statement organized with the precision that had once impressed Robert's business partners. Now those same documents would serve a different purpose. I pulled out the first file, Sterling Enterprises Incorporation Papers from 1998. My signature appeared right beside Robert's, listing me as co-founder and initial investor. Funny how history had a way of rewriting itself in corporate press releases. I photographed each page with my phone, creating a digital trail that couldn't be disputed or hidden. The second file contained loan documents from 2001 when Robert needed capital to expand. My family's law firm had provided the connections, but more importantly, I'd signed as guarantor for the $3 million loan. My personal assets had been on the line, not his. Another photo, another piece of evidence. By 8 o'clock, I'd documented 15 years of financial contributions that told a story Robert's company biography conveniently omitted. The inheritance from my grandmother that funded his first major acquisition. The second mortgage on our house to cover payroll during the 2008 recession. The countless client referrals from my network that had built his empire. My phone rang. David Chen's name flashed on the screen. "Margaret, I've been trying to reach you since 6. The markets open in 30 minutes and I need verbal confirmation for these trades. You have it. Execute everything we discussed. The Sterling Enterprises stock has already dropped 2% in pre-market trading. Word is getting out about major shareholder changes. Are you absolutely certain?" "David, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "All right. Give me 2 hours and it'll be done." I hung up and opened my laptop. The legal notice I drafted at 3 in the morning stared back at me, clinical and precise. No emotional appeals, no explanations, just facts. Margaret Elizabeth Sterling hereby notifies the Board of Directors of Sterling Enterprises of the immediate liquidation of her 17% ownership stake and the termination of all joint financial obligations. My finger hovered over the send button for exactly 3 seconds before clicking. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it the end of everything Robert thought he controlled. 30 seconds later my phone exploded. Robert's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then again. And again. By the 4th missed call I was actually enjoying the silence between rings. Each unanswered call was a small victory, a tiny reclamation of power. The text messages started next. "Margaret, what the hell did you do? Call me back immediately. Delete. This is insane. You can't just destroy everything we built because you're having some kind of breakdown. Delete. The board is in emergency session. You've triggered a company-wide crisis. Call me. Delete." I made myself a second cup of coffee and returned to my filing cabinets. The partnership agreements Robert had insisted on renegotiating 5 years ago suddenly looked very different through my current lens. He'd been planning this for longer than I'd realized, slowly reducing my official involvement while increasing my financial liability. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd never removed my name from the original incorporation documents. In the eyes of the law, I was still a founding partner with equal rights to company information and decision-making authority. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Vanessa. I hope you're feeling better this morning. Perhaps we could have coffee and discuss last night's misunderstanding." I stared at the message for a full minute. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd publicly humiliated me was now reaching out like we were old friends who'd had a minor disagreement. I typed back. "There was no misunderstanding. And it's Ms. Hartford now. I'm returning to my maiden name." Her response came immediately. "Let's not be hasty. Robert is very upset and I think we can work something out that benefits everyone." Benefits everyone. As if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person who'd been betrayed. I took a screenshot of her message and added it to my growing collection of evidence. My landline rang. A number so few people had that it could only be one person. "Margaret Elizabeth, what in God's name is going on?" My sister Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker. "Robert just called me in tears saying you've lost your mind." "I found my mind, actually. For the first time in years. He says you've destroyed his company out of spite. That you're having some kind of emotional breakdown and making decisions you'll regret." I walked to my window overlooking the garden Robert had never shown any interest in maintaining. My roses were in full bloom, tended carefully by hands he'd never bothered to notice were always dirty from soil. "Sarah, did you know that I've contributed over $20 million to Robert's success? Not including the value of my time, my connections, or my unpaid labor. Well, that's what marriages are. Did you know he's been having an affair with his assistant? That she publicly humiliated me in front of 200 people last night." Silence. "I'm not having a breakdown, Sarah. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference." After I hung up, the house felt peaceful again. I returned to my desk and opened a new document. If Robert wanted to play the victim, he'd need to explain 23 years of financial records that painted a very different picture. My phone showed 56 missed calls now, but the constant buzzing had become white noise. Each ignored ring felt like shedding another layer of the life that had been suffocating me without my realizing it. The woman who'd left that party in shame was gone. In her place sat someone Robert had never met. Someone who knew exactly what she was worth and wasn't afraid to collect. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom had always intimidated visitors with its floor-to-ceiling windows and imposing conference table. But today I felt perfectly at home in the leather chair I'd occupied for countless strategy meetings over the years. I'd arrived 30 minutes early, spreading my documents across the polished surface like a general preparing for battle. The other board members filtered in with uncomfortable expressions, men I'd known for decades who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. James Morrison, our longtime CFO, gave me a sympathetic nod before taking his usual seat. Patricia Webb from legal looked positively sick, probably already calculating the ramifications of my actions. Then Robert burst through the mahogany doors. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read his moods, but I'd never seen him look quite like this. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, his tie crooked and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The commanding presence that had dominated this room for 15 years had evaporated overnight. Vanessa slipped in behind him, her red power suit a stark contrast to her pale complexion. She positioned herself against the far wall, arms crossed defensively, trying to project confidence but failing miserably. Her eyes darted between Robert and me like a cornered animal calculating escape routes. Margaret. Robert's voice cracked slightly on my name. What have you done? I leaned back in my chair, hands folded calmly in my lap. Good morning, Robert. Gentlemen, Patricia. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice. Don't play games. Robert slammed his palm against the table, making several board members jump. You've triggered a company-wide financial crisis. Our stock is in free fall, clients are panicking, and the bank is demanding explanations for frozen accounts. James Morrison cleared his throat. Margaret, perhaps we could discuss a more gradual transition. There's nothing to discuss, James. I've liquidated my position in accordance with company bylaws. Everything was done legally and properly. Robert began pacing behind his chair like a caged predator. You've taken everything from me. 23 years of work, destroyed overnight because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. The accusation hung in the air and I saw several board members shift uncomfortably. They were waiting for me to defend myself, to break down, to prove Robert's narrative that I was an unstable woman acting irrationally. Instead, I opened my folder and pulled out a single document. This is the original incorporation filing from 1998, I said, my voice steady and professional. You'll notice my name listed as co-founder and primary investor. Funny how that detail never made it into your company biography. Robert stopped pacing. That was just a formality. This is the loan guarantee I signed in 2001 when you needed $3 million to acquire Morrison Industries. I placed another document on the table. My personal assets secured that expansion, not yours. Vanessa uncrossed her arms, suddenly paying very close attention. And this, I continued, producing a thick stack of papers, documents every financial contribution I've made to Sterling Enterprises over the past 2 decades. $27 million in direct investment, not including the market value of business connections, client relationships, and strategic guidance. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Robert's face had gone from red to pale gray. Margaret, Patricia Webb spoke carefully. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything. I'm informing you that as of this morning, I've divested all holdings in Sterling Enterprises. The company will need to restructure immediately to remain solvent. You can't just, Robert started, but I cut him off. I can and I have. What I built I can unbuild. For the first time since entering the room, I looked directly at Vanessa. She was no longer the confident woman who'd humiliated me at the party. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fear in her eyes as she realized the implications of my actions. Of course, I continued, still watching Vanessa, the company could potentially recover if new leadership were installed. Someone without the baggage of recent scandal. Robert followed my gaze to his mistress, and understanding dawned on his face. You're destroying everything to get back at me for. For what, Robert? For having an affair? For publicly humiliating me? For erasing my contributions from company history? I stood slowly, gathering my documents. This isn't revenge. This is business. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. James Morrison was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how to minimize damage to his own position. Patricia Webb looked like she was already drafting resignation letters. Robert slumped into his chair, the fight draining out of him. What do you want? I want what I've always wanted. Recognition for my contributions and respect for my intelligence. Since you seem incapable of providing either, I've decided to provide them for myself. The board will never accept this, he said weakly. The board doesn't have a choice. Unless you can produce $27 million by close of business tomorrow, Sterling Enterprises will be insolvent. I paused at the door. I suggest you call an emergency shareholder meeting to discuss new leadership. As I reached for the door handle, Robert played his final card. I'm stepping down as CEO. The words echoed through the boardroom like a death knell. Several board members gasped audibly. Vanessa's face went white as her meal ticket evaporated before her eyes. I turned back to face him. For just a moment I saw the young lawyer I'd fallen in love with, brilliant, ambitious, but ultimately weak when faced with real consequences. That's a wise decision, Robert. I'll have my attorney prepare the necessary paperwork for our divorce as well. Once you've secured the company's future, we can discuss the division of our personal assets. I walked out of that boardroom as a different woman than I'd walked in. Behind me, I could hear frantic whispers and the scratch of Patricia's pen as she began damage control. Vanessa's heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor as she hurried after Robert, probably already calculating her own exit strategy. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding and I finally allowed myself a small smile. 23 years of being invisible had taught me exactly how visible I could become when I chose to be. The elevator descended in complete silence, carrying me away from 23 years of my life. When the doors opened in the parking garage, I felt like I was stepping into an entirely different world. One where I made the rules instead of following someone else's script. My phone buzzed incessantly during the drive home, Robert's name flashing on the screen with desperate persistence. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the missed call counter had reached 43. I turned off the phone and slipped it into my purse, craving the silence. Inside our house, my house now, I realized, everything looked exactly the same but felt completely foreign. The wedding photos lining the hallway seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. The kitchen where I'd hosted countless dinner parties for Robert's clients felt too large, too empty. Even our bedroom with its California king bed and matching nightstands belonged to a couple I no longer recognized. I walked straight to my home office and pulled out the manila folder I'd prepared weeks ago but never had the courage to use. The divorce papers sat crisp and clean, every line of legal text representing a door closing and another opening. At the top of the first page, bold letters declared, "Petition for dissolution of marriage, Margaret Elizabeth Sterling versus Robert James Sterling." My hand trembled slightly as I signed my name on the first line. Margaret E. Hartford. I'd already started the process of reclaiming my maiden name, and seeing it in writing felt like putting on clothes that actually fit after years of wearing someone else's wardrobe. The second signature came easier. Then the third. By the time I reached the final page, my hand was steady, my resolve absolute. I sealed everything in the pre-addressed envelope and placed it in my outgoing mail basket. Tomorrow, a process server would deliver them to Robert's office, making our separation official in the eyes of the law. As I set the envelope aside, something unexpected washed over me, not grief or anger but profound relief. For the first time in decades, I wasn't wondering what Robert wanted for dinner, or whether I should attend some client function, or how to support his latest business venture. The mental space that had always been occupied by his needs suddenly belonged entirely to me. That night I slept better than I had in months. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of legal meetings and paperwork, but also something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about my own future. My attorney, Rebecca Martinez, became both legal counsel and unofficial therapist as we navigated the complexities of dissolving a marriage worth millions. "Your financial documentation is incredibly thorough," Rebecca noted during one of our sessions. Most spouses can't prove half of what you've contributed to the marital estate. I've always been organized. It used to drive Robert crazy. Well, it's going to save you millions now. His attorney is pushing for a 50-50 split, but based on your investment records, you're entitled to significantly more. Between legal meetings, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I enrolled in a photography class, something I'd loved in college but abandoned when Robert declared it impractical. My instructor, a retired National Geographic photographer named Elena, became an unexpected friend and mentor. "You have a good eye," she told me after reviewing my first assignment. "You see stories others miss." I'd always seen stories. In Robert's business deals, in the lives of his clients, in the social dynamics of corporate parties. But I'd never considered that my perspective had value beyond supporting someone else's narrative. My sister Sarah visited one afternoon, ostensibly to check on my emotional state, but really to satisfy her curiosity about my dramatic life change. "You seem different," she said, settling into my kitchen with coffee and the judgmental expression she'd perfected over 50 years. "I feel different. Lighter somehow. Robert says you won't return his calls. He's worried about you." I looked at her over my coffee cup. "Sarah, when was the last time you and I had coffee without discussing Robert, his needs, his business, or his problems?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing she couldn't remember. "Exactly. Even now, you're here because of him, not because you want to spend time with your sister." Her face flushed. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. And it's not your fault. I trained everyone in my life to see me as Robert's wife first and Margaret second. But that person doesn't exist anymore." 3 months after filing the divorce papers, I made my first major business investment as a single woman. A small sustainable fashion company run by 2 young designers who reminded me of Robert and myself 25 years ago. Hungry, brilliant, and completely convinced they could change the world. "Why fashion?" Rebecca asked when I told her about the investment. "Because they're building something beautiful that doesn't depend on exploiting other people. And because I want to prove I can identify talent and nurture success without anyone else's approval." The investment felt like stepping off a cliff but also like learning to fly. 6 months later, I was leaving a gallery opening where my photography was being featured in a group exhibition when I saw him. Robert stood near the entrance, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment time stopped. He approached slowly as if afraid I might flee. "Margaret, you look..." He searched for words. "You look happy." "I am happy, Robert. Genuinely happy. I heard about your photography. And the business investment. You're doing well." "I'm doing what I should have been doing all along, living my own life." He nodded, and I could see the regret etched in the lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. Thank you for saying that. I hope you find whatever you're looking for." I walked past him toward the exit, feeling his eyes follow me but not looking back. Outside, the evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn. I had dinner plans with Elena and her husband, followed by a weekend trip to photograph coastal landscapes. A life entirely of my own making. For the first time in 23 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The coastal highway stretched before me like a ribbon of possibility, my camera equipment secured in the passenger seat of my new Tesla Model S, purchased with my own money in my own name, painted the exact shade of midnight blue I'd always loved but Robert had deemed too flashy. The morning sun cast everything in golden light as I drove toward my favorite photography spot, a secluded cliff overlooking the Pacific where I'd captured some of my best work over the past year. 12 months had passed since that devastating night at the company party, and the woman behind the wheel bore little resemblance to the one who'd been escorted out in shame. My hair, now shoulder-length and streaked with silver I no longer felt compelled to hide, caught the breeze from the open sunroof. The designer clothes that had once been chosen to complement Robert's image had been replaced with comfortable jeans and a soft cashmere sweater I'd bought simply because I loved the color. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Exhibition opens in 2 hours. Still can't believe they're featuring 8 of your pieces." The Meridian Gallery showing represented everything I'd worked toward this past year. My photographs, intimate portraits of women rebuilding their lives after major transitions, had caught the attention of critics who praised their raw authenticity and quiet strength. The irony wasn't lost on me that my art had emerged from my own transformation. As I set up my tripod on the cliff, muscle memory guiding my movements, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my financial advisor yesterday. Hartford Ventures, the investment firm I'd launched 6 months ago, had just closed its third successful deal. The sustainable fashion company had exceeded all projections, and 2 other startups in my portfolio were showing remarkable growth. "You have an instinct for identifying potential," Rebecca Martinez had said during our quarterly review. "These entrepreneurs trust you because you understand what it means to rebuild from scratch." The viewfinder showed me a perfect composition: waves crashing against jagged rocks, seabirds riding the wind currents, the endless horizon promising adventures yet to come. I adjusted the settings and captured the moment, knowing this image would join the others in my upcoming book proposal. Resilience: Portraits of Women Reclaimed had already generated interest from 3 major publishers. My phone rang as I packed up my equipment. Sarah's name appeared on the screen and I answered with genuine warmth for the first time in years. "Margaret, I just wanted to wish you luck tonight. I know how much this exhibition means to you." "Thank you. Are you still planning to drive down for it?" "Wouldn't miss it. And Margaret, I owe you an apology. You were right about how I'd gotten used to seeing you only as Robert's wife. Getting to know you this past year as just my sister has been a gift." After hanging up, I drove toward the city with a lightness in my chest that had become my new normal. The radio played classical music, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and I found myself humming along, something I never would have done in Robert's presence. He'd always preferred silence during car rides, claiming music was distracting. The gallery buzzed with anticipation when I arrived for the final setup. My pieces occupied an entire wall, black and white portraits that told stories of transformation, resilience, and self-discovery. Each photograph represented weeks of building trust with women who'd agreed to share their most vulnerable moments with my camera. "These are extraordinary," said James Whitfield, the gallery owner, as we made final adjustments to the lighting. "The way you've captured not just their faces but their spirits. It's powerful work." The opening reception drew a crowd larger than I'd expected. Art collectors, critics, and curious locals mingled beneath my photographs, their conversations creating a gentle hum of appreciation. I moved through the crowd confidently, discussing my work with passion and authority, qualities I'd possessed all along but had never been encouraged to display. "Excuse me, are you the photographer?" I turned to find a young woman in her 30s, her eyes bright with curiosity and something else, recognition perhaps. "I am. I'm Margaret Hartford. Your work speaks to me," she said, gesturing toward a portrait of a woman in her 60s, laughing despite visible tear tracks on her cheeks.